The coffee was still hot when my son-in-law knocked on my door and asked if I could take his daughter for the weekend. That's how it started. A knock, a favor, a weekend that turned into something I still haven't fully found words for. His name is Brock. He married my daughter Adele 7 years ago, and I'll be honest, I never warmed to him the way a father hopes to. He's not a bad-looking man, keeps himself neat, says the right things at the right times. But there was always something a little too careful about him, like he was performing rather than living. I told myself I was being an overprotective father. Adele loved him. They had a daughter together, my granddaughter Piper, who was 8 years old and had my daughter's eyes and my late wife's laugh, and absolutely nothing of Brock that I could see, which I always thought was a small mercy. My wife, Rosalind, passed 4 years ago, breast cancer, the kind that moves fast and doesn't apologize. After she died, I sold the house we'd raised Adele in and moved into a smaller place about 12 minutes from their neighborhood. Close enough that Adele could check on me, far enough that I wasn't underfoot. That balance seemed to work for everyone. I was retired by then, 31 years with the county water department, most of it in operations management. Not a glamorous life, but a steady one. Since Rosalind died, I'd filled the hours with the garden she left behind, a woodworking hobby I was mediocre at, and Friday evening calls with my college roommate who lived out in Oregon. I wasn't lonely exactly, but I was quieter than I used to be. So when Brock showed up that Saturday morning in early October, saying he had a work trip to Portland 2 nights, and that Adele was already out of town visiting her cousin, who'd just had a baby, could I take Piper? I said yes before he finished the sentence. Piper and I had a good relationship. She liked that I let her help in the garden, and she liked that I didn't talk down to her. She was a serious kid, not shy, just thoughtful. She'd look at you a little longer than most children do before she decided what to say. Rosalind had been like that too. Brock carried her backpack to the door and set it down and hugged her in a way that looked like a hug but didn't feel like one, if you know what I mean. Arms without weight. Then he was gone, and Piper stood in my entryway holding the strap of her backpack with both hands. "You want breakfast?" I asked. "I've got eggs. I was going to make toast." She looked at the kitchen. Then she looked at me. "Is it okay if I eat?" I thought I'd misheard her. "What's that?" She stopped. "Sorry, yes please, eggs would be really good." I let it go. Kids say strange things. I made scrambled eggs and she ate every bit and then looked at the pan, like she was wondering if it would be rude to ask for more. I put another scoop on her plate without her asking. She said thank you 3 times. We spent the morning in the garden. I showed her how to pull the dead marigolds, and she did it carefully, methodically, making a little pile at her feet. She was good company. She asked me questions about the plants. She asked me about Grandma Rosalind. I told her some things. How Rosalind could grow anything, how she talked to the tomatoes, how the garden had gone a little wild the first year after she passed because I couldn't make myself go out there. "Did it make you sad to come back out?" Piper asked. It did at first, but she would have been annoyed with me for letting it go to waste. Piper nodded seriously, like she was filing that away. After lunch, she asked if she could take a bath. I said, of course. Go ahead. There are towels in the closet. She was in there a long time. When she came out, she was wearing different clothes from her backpack, and her hair was damp, and she looked, I don't know how to explain it. She looked like she'd exhaled for the first time all day. That night, I made chicken soup because it was getting cold, and it was the thing I knew how to make well. She ate 2 bowls. I noticed she kept watching me between bites, like she was checking whether I was going to take it away. I didn't say anything about it, but something had started turning over in the back of my mind. Before bed, I sat on the edge of the guest bed while she got settled, and I asked her how things were at school. She said fine. I asked about her teacher. She said Ms. Waverly was nice. I asked if she had a best friend. She was quiet a moment. Kind of. Junie. But I haven't seen her as much lately. How come? I don't have as many playdates anymore. She smoothed the blanket over her lap. Dad says they're disruptive. I didn't push. I said goodnight and turned off the light and went to sit in my kitchen in the dark for a while. The next morning I found her already awake, sitting in the living room in the gray early light, hands folded in her lap, not watching TV, not reading, just sitting there very still. I asked how long she'd been up. "A while," she said. "Did you sleep okay?" "Better than usual." I made oatmeal and we sat together and I watched her eat, and I thought about the question the night before. Is it okay if I eat? And I thought about the way she'd looked at that frying pan, and I thought about a kid who sleeps better than usual at her grandfather's house, and I thought about the play dates that were disruptive. "Piper," I said, "can I ask you something and you can tell me if you'd rather not answer?" She looked up. "Are you happy at home?" It was a direct question. Too direct, maybe. But I was 63 years old, and I had run out of patience for circling around things. She looked back down at her oatmeal. She stirred it once. Then she said, very quietly, "It's okay when Mom's there." 4 words that opened a door I couldn't close again. I asked her what it was like when Mom wasn't there. She was careful. She chose her words the way you do when you've learned that words have consequences. She told me that her dad had a lot of rules. That was how she put it. A lot of rules. Rules about when she could eat, and how much, and whether she had to earn it. Rules about screen time that she understood, and rules about other things that she wasn't sure she understood. Rules about staying in her room, about how loud she was allowed to be, about whether she was allowed to have friends over, or go to friends' houses, or answer the phone when her mom called if her dad hadn't said it was okay first. I kept my voice even. I asked how long it had been like this. She thought about it. "A while," she said again. "It got more after Grandma Rosalind died. I think because Mom was sad a lot, and he had to do more." I nodded. I thanked her for telling me. I told her she wasn't in trouble. I told her she did the right thing. And then I excused myself and went to the bathroom and stood over the sink with the water running and tried to get my breathing under control. I didn't call Adele right away. I needed to think. My daughter was 3 states away, and the cousin she was visiting had just had a baby. And I didn't have enough yet. I had a little girl's words and a knot in my stomach. That wasn't enough. So I did something I've second-guessed 100 times since. I called Piper's school on Monday morning after I'd dropped her off. I asked to speak to her teacher, Ms. Waverly. I said I was Piper's grandfather, that I was asking some questions I hoped she could help me with, and I asked whether the school had noticed anything concerning. Ms. Waverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "Mister, I'm glad you called. We've had some concerns. I was actually in the process of speaking with our counselor." She told me Piper had come to school twice in the past month without having eaten, that she'd fallen asleep in class, that she'd gotten thinner, that when the school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Ford, had gently asked Piper if everything was okay at home, Piper had said yes, but had started picking at a loose thread on her sleeve and hadn't made eye contact for the rest of the conversation. The school was a mandatory reporter. Ms. Waverly said they had been preparing to make a call to Child Protective Services. I thanked her, I hung up, and then I called my daughter. It was one of the hardest phone calls of my life. Not because Adele didn't believe me. She did, faster than I expected, and that broke my heart in a different way. Because it told me something had already been gnawing at her. But because she started crying in a way I hadn't heard since the weeks after her mother died, this low, awful sound, and I could hear in it the specific grief of a mother who is realizing she has been missing something she should have seen. "I knew the rules were strict," she said. "He said it was structure. He said kids need structure. I didn't know about the food, Dad. I swear to God I didn't know about the food. I believe you." She never told me. And here is the thing I've sat with since. Piper didn't tell her mother because she loved her mother and didn't want to make things worse. She had calculated, at 8 years old, that protecting her mother from worry was more important than getting help for herself. That's not a thing healthy children learn to do. That's a thing children learn when the emotional climate at home requires them to manage everyone else's feelings before their own. Adele cut her trip short. She was home by that evening. What happened next was not simple, and it was not fast, and anyone who tells you these situations resolve cleanly has never been in one. CPS opened an investigation. There were interviews. Piper had to speak to a caseworker named Mr. Okonkwo, who was patient and soft-spoken and good at his job. There were interviews with Brock, who was composed and articulate and had an explanation for everything. Too many rules, he admitted. He was under financial pressure. He didn't go into details. But the number that eventually came out was close to $40,000 in debt from a business decision that had gone badly 2 years ago. He said he'd been struggling. He said he knew he'd been too hard on Piper. He said he loved his daughter. I sat in my kitchen the night after his interview and felt something ugly move through me, because part of me wanted there to be a monster, and part of me was looking at a man who had caved in on himself under pressure and taken it out on a child, which is a different kind of terrible. But let me be clear, different doesn't mean less. Piper had lost weight. Piper had learned to ask permission before she ate. Piper had stopped having friends over, had stopped calling her grandmother's friends who used to visit, had quietly drawn her whole world smaller because her father's anxiety and control had told her the world was only as big as he allowed it to be. That is not strict parenting. That is something else. The investigation took 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, Adele and Piper moved into a hotel initially, then into my house. I put Piper in the guest room and told her she could eat whatever she wanted whenever she wanted, that I would never put rules on food in this house. The first week she still asked. She'd come to the kitchen and stand in the doorway and say, "Is it okay if I get a snack?" And I would say, "Piper, you never have to ask me that. You know where everything is." By the third week she stopped asking. She started sleeping through the night. She started talking more, just chattering, the way kids do when they've found a safe place for it. She told me about a book she was reading. She told me about a girl at school named Juniper who she wanted to have over. I said, "Invite her any day you like." Adele was a different story. My daughter was in a kind of free fall that I recognized because I'd seen something like it after her mother died. That particular disorientation of having your life rearranged without your permission. But this was complicated in ways grief isn't. Grief is clean in a horrible way. This was tangled. She still loved Brock in some version of the word. She was furious at him. She was furious at herself. She had conversations on the phone with him that left her pacing the kitchen at midnight, and I would sit up and not say anything unless she wanted me to. One night she came and sat across from me at the kitchen table at about 1 in the morning and said, "He says he didn't know he was hurting her." I thought about that. Does it matter? She looked at me. "I don't mean that coldly," I said. "I mean, for what you decide next, does it matter?" She was quiet a long time. "I think it matters for whether I hate him, but maybe not for anything else." That was my daughter working something out, and I let her work it out. What came out during the investigation, and some of this I learned later, from Adele, from what Piper eventually shared more of, was that Brock had been raised in a home where emotional control was the primary currency. His father had run the household through punishment and withholding. Not violence, at least not that anyone named directly, but the withdrawal of food and warmth and approval as discipline. Brock had grown up believing that was structure, that love was conditional on performance. He had carried that into his own home, and he had not even noticed it happening. I didn't share that with Piper, but it helped me, a little, in the dark hours. Understanding where something comes from doesn't excuse it. It doesn't erase what my granddaughter learned to do, learned to be small, to be quiet, to be hungry without saying so. But it lets you see the whole shape of a thing instead of just the wound. Brock agreed to a parenting evaluation as part of the process. He entered therapy. Adele filed for a separation, not a divorce, at least not yet. She told me she was not ready to close a door she might want to walk back through. I did not tell her what I thought about that, because it wasn't my door. What I can tell you is what I saw over the months that followed. I saw my granddaughter slowly become more herself. Not all at once. It was incremental, the way a plant comes back after a bad winter. You don't see it happening, and then one day you notice there's new growth. She started leaving food on her plate sometimes. That sounds small, but it wasn't. It meant she was eating until she was full instead of eating until the food was gone because the food might not be there later. She started making noise in the house again. Kid noise, thoughtless and lovely. She had Juniper over 3 Saturdays in a row, and they built something complicated out of cardboard boxes in the backyard that I was not allowed to ask questions about. One evening in the spring she came out to the garden while I was working, and sat on the low stone wall my wife used to sit on, and she watched me for a while, and then she said, "Grandpa, did you ever do something you didn't know was wrong while you were doing it?" I stopped what I was doing. I looked at her. "Yes," I said. "More than once. What did you do?" I paid attention when someone told me, and then I tried to do differently. She nodded. She was quiet a moment. "Do you think Dad will do differently?" I chose my words carefully. "I think that's something only he can decide." She seemed to accept that. She picked up a small stone and turned it over in her hands. "I hope he does," she said. "I still love him." "I know you do," I said. "That makes sense." And I meant it. The capacity of children to hold love for someone who has failed them is either the most heartbreaking or the most hopeful thing in the world, and I am still not sure which. Maybe it is both at once. Adele and Brock did eventually file for divorce. It took about a year and a half from that October morning when Brock knocked on my door. It was not clean. No divorce with a child is. But Adele came through it with full primary custody and a parenting plan that included Brock's ongoing participation in therapy as a condition of overnight visits. That was non-negotiable. She was firm on it in a way that made me proud of her, in a way I didn't have words for. Brock pays child support. That was one of the first things Adele made sure of. I know there are people reading this who would have wanted him to face criminal charges. I understand that. I felt that too in the hours when I let myself really sit with what my granddaughter had learned to ask. Is it okay if I eat? But the legal threshold for what was happening in that house. No bruises, no records of emergency room visits. A child who had been frightened and controlled and diminished, but who could not point to a single incident severe enough for criminal prosecution. It doesn't always line up with the damage that was done. That's a failure of the system. It's a real failure. And the people who are supposed to notice, teachers, school counselors, doctors at annual checkups, they don't always catch it either. I'm not saying that to excuse anyone. I'm saying it because I think parents and grandparents and neighbors and anyone who spends time with children need to know. The signs are subtle. A child who is too quiet. A child who eats too fast or too carefully. A child who asks permission for ordinary things. A child who says they sleep better somewhere else. Listen to those children. Piper is 9 now. She's doing well. She's in the garden more than ever, and I've started teaching her the things Rosalind taught me and some things I've figured out myself. She has a loud laugh that fills up this small house, and I don't think she has any idea what a gift that is. To hear her laugh like that, like she doesn't have to worry about who might hear. I think about the morning I almost let the question go. Is it okay if I eat? I almost said something about kids saying funny things and moved on. I almost told myself I was reading too much into it. I almost decided it wasn't my place. I've been a grandfather for 9 years, and before that a father for 30, and before that a son in a house with its own complications, and I have learned one thing with more certainty than almost anything else. When a child says something that stops you cold, you stop. You don't walk past it. You don't decide it's probably nothing. You stop, and you ask, and you listen to whatever comes next. Even if what comes next is hard. Even if what comes next changes everything. It's supposed to change everything. That's the point.